Okay, welcome to this introduction to Perch Runway. This is the second webinar that we've done. If you're following along in the chat room, feel free to ask any questions. You're about 30 seconds behind where I am broadcasting, just the way the technology works. So I won't see any questions immediately, but Rachel's monitoring the chat and will let me know any questions, and we'll probably do any bigger questions towards the end. Just because of the broadcast delay, that makes it easier to deal with. So this is an introduction to Perch Runway. Perch Runway is a larger version of Perch that's designed for more complex projects with bigger requirements. And the idea behind it, having Runway as a separate project is to, separate product, is so that we can add the sort of functionality that larger sites need without needing to make Perch any more complex. So Perch can be, it can remain ideal for small websites, for retrofitting to existing static page websites. And then Perch Runway can add the functionality that you need on bigger projects. So today we're going to look at a few things to do with Perch Runway to give you a bit of an idea how it works and really what the key differences are between Runway and Perch. So the first thing we're going to look at is the differences in installing Perch Runway and what the requirements are on your web hosting. We look at how pages are managed and created in Runway and using the URL routing. We're going to look at a feature called Collections, which is a way of managing larger chunks of content. And we're going to look at the cloud storage and CDN capabilities within Perch Runway, and then a backup and restore. So the first thing to think about is installing. The server requirements for Perch Runway are a bit different to Perch. It tends to need things that are just a little bit more modern and a little bit more capable. So one key difference is that Perch Runway requires PHP 5.4. Perch currently requires PHP 5.3, but Runway requires 5.4. With that, it needs the PDO library, which is the library that PHP uses to talk to your database. It needs JSON support. It needs either GD or ImageMagick for image manipulation. And you need 64-bit integers for the Dropbox support. Also requires MySQL 5.0, which is common with Perch. But a sort of key difference is Perch Runway requires some method of doing URL rewriting, which if you're using something like Apache, that would be mod rewrite. If you're using Nginx, then you've got URL rewriting available typically. And it also needs some way of scheduling tasks. On Unix type servers, that tends to be setting up a cron job or a scheduled task on Windows. So let's look at installing and the install process. So I've got a completely blank site here. I've unzipped the Runway download and put it into my site as the Perch folder here. So if I navigate to that, it should take me to install. As you can see, the installer looks in some ways similar to how it does in Perch, but in other ways a bit different. Let's grab my license key. I've got a sort of dummy license key here. So you just fill out the contents, details for your default user account. Ways. And I will fill in the install location, which you can tweak if you need to, the time zone if you need to tweak that. My database name, I'll just copy in. Username, password for the database. You can set a custom table name prefix here. So if you want to install multiple copies of Perch and Perch Runway in the same database, you can have a different prefix on the table names for each. Not something you need to do particularly often, but if you do need that, that option is available. And if your MySQL server runs on a custom port, you can set the port number there too. So I'll click next. And this just tells me then that the configuration file was written successfully, tables were created, the user account was set up, and the database setup is complete. So the next step is setting up URL rewriting. Now this varies depending on what type of server that you're running, because each server has a different way of dealing with URL rewriting. Apache is the most common, and you may be familiar with putting mod rewrite rules in something like an htaccess file. That's what we need to do here. And the idea was with Runway, you can just paste in one set of rules, set it up once, and then you don't need to, you don't need to worry about URL rewriting. Again, you don't have to write all these mod rewrite rules because then Perch just takes care of it. So I'm going to just copy this and go into my site, create a new file. Let's call it htaccess, and save. There for Nginx, and then step by step, if you're using something else, like if you're using IIS and a rewriting module on that, it tells you the steps you need to follow to set that up. So I've done that. And the next thing it asked me to do is set up a way of running scheduled tasks. If you're using cron, which is common on Unix type servers, it gives you the command to put into cron. I'm actually going to skip this step because I'm just in a development environment. I don't need the scheduled task to be running for me like I would in a live environment. So I'm just going to skip this for now. But if I did want to set that up, then all the information is there for me. So just like with the Perch install, tells me the next step is to make sure that the Perch resources folder is writable for file uploads, to delete the setup folder, and then to log into my grabberperch.com account and make sure that the domain that I'm running on is configured as one of the domains for the license, which it is. So I should now be able to log on. Use the details of the setup step. There we go. So as you can see inside Runway, the first thing that that has happened during the installation process is a couple of different pages have been set up for me just to help me get started. The first one of those is a home page, and there's this errors page, which underneath it is a 404 page. That's because Runway will deal with all the error handling for you. So if somebody types in a URL which doesn't match anything, it goes to a 404 page, and you can customize that 404 page. We put a default one in there for you, but we'd expect that you would customize that to your site and to your own requirements. But it's there to, the 404 page sort of has a special status because the system needs to be able to find it if any other pages aren't matched. So we put it there for you. So that's set up and saves you some fiddly configuration. So that's sort of kind of how it works. And everything then with these pages, it works pretty much the same way as it does in Perch. So I can go into my home page. In fact, if I click to view the site, I can see there's some navigation. My home page is working. I got this main heading region, and just as I would with Perch, I can say, welcome to my site. Save that. And if I refresh the page, there we are. So the content management in that sense works just the same as it would with Perch for basic management of on-page content. So that's our site up and running. So there's a fairly fundamental difference the way that Runway handles pages within a site. One of the limitations of the way that Perch deals with creating pages when you get up to a big scale is that although it's very convenient to have lots of PHP files in your website with each representing a different page, that works great for retrofitting into an existing site, or if you're just dealing with a small site, that system is really straightforward, enables you to get up and running very quickly, enables you to add content management to pages really quickly, and works brilliantly for small sites. But for bigger sites, it can become cumbersome to have lots and lots of pages, especially when moving between environments. and you might want to you'd have to move all those pages, and then when a page moves within a site, if the URL changes, we actually have to move that PHP file to a different location in the site, and it's not ideal when you're dealing with large amounts of pages. So what we do in Runway is we get rid of all that, and pages don't exist as PHP files. What happens is you create a page in Runway, you give it a path within the site, and you give it a master page. And what Runway does is it matches that when a request comes in, it matches the path to a page. It looks up its master page, and it uses the master page then to deliver that mixed with your content from the database. So what Runway really does is encourage you to develop a system of master pages to represent the different types of pages on your site. Some of those will be unique, things like the home page you're unlikely to use elsewhere, but other pages like a sort of standard article page or a listing page, things like that, will appear in all sorts of different places within your site. So by developing this system of different styles of pages for your site, you can create master pages, and then when you create a new page, you can say which of those master pages this new page is based on. So let's look at creating pages. Let's say I wanted to create an about page for my site. So the first thing I'd want to do is create a new master page that is going to be the template for my about page. So I'm going to go into my Perch folder, into templates and pages. Here you can see the home.php master page that the home page is using. I'm just going to copy the contents of that and create a new file. I'm going to call it about.php. And organize this pages folder into subfolders, and that's probably a good idea as you build your site out to think about groups of master pages and what their purpose is, and to organize them into subfolders to make them easy to manage. So I've got my new about.php master page. I'll paste in the content. This the structure of this page is quite simple. It's calling in the global header layout. I'm going to pass in a different body class into it. Content region, which is main heading, we'll keep that. It outputs the navigation, fine. It then has an introduction region and then the footer. So fine, I'll save that. In fact, let's change this this region to be others. So within I can say add page. I'll call it about. About. So at the top level, and then the master page that we're going to use for it is about. Submit that. And then if I look at the regions for that page, you'll see there's our main heading and about us. So I'll just go in and give it a title and say, let's go all about us. Refresh my home page, you see I'm now in the navigation, got the new about page. Click through, there's my about page, and there's the text I just entered, all about us. So from a client perspective, so somebody who's actually using the system to manage their website, although under the hood everything is different about how pages are managed within Runway. Technically we're not creating PHP files, we're using URL routing and master pages and stuff from the database all combined. The person who's actually managing the site doesn't know that. There's no practical difference in how they actually deal with pages, how the things are structured. They can, as you can see, they can just reorder things and what have you, just as they would before. They still see the structure of their site. It can still be organized in a nice logical way. There's really no difference in how the pages in the site are actually managed from a user point of view. So the next thing I want to talk about is routes. We saw with our about page that we just created it in the root of the site, and it had a path of /about. Now that's the page's path. It's also essentially a route, because what happens when a page is requested within a runway site is that the URL rewriting rule that we put into the htaccess file is actually taking any request in the website for a page that doesn't exist as an actual file in the website, and it redirects it into Runway. And then Runway takes that, looks through the database at all the different pages it's got, and finds the one that matches. So if somebody asks for mywebsite.com/about, what it would do is look at all the pages in the database, find the one that is called /about, and then deliver that up. Because this is a fairly dynamic process, what it means is we can add extra rules, or what we call routes, into that process, so that when it's looking for the page, we can add in more things to be considered. So in a very simple case, we can actually add in multiple URLs for a page. So if we go back into our About page and go to our page options, you'll see that our path is /about, and then we've got this section called routes, and we can add in patterns for that. So say that we wanted this page that's /about to also be available at /company, for example. Put in a route that says company. And then if we go back to our page, if I refresh it on About, that's still in the same place. The navigation for it is still /about. Company. Also get that About page. Set company up as a route for it. What we'll look at in a moment is actually how these routes can be even more dynamic than that, and can include patterns and replace things that you would typically do in the query string. I think the best way to illustrate this is to look at collections. So Perch for many years has had multiple item regions. These are regions that can have lots and lots of items in it, repeating over and over. And those multiple item regions are great for dealing with a certain amount of content. But a characteristic of the way that multiple item regions work is that they are versioned as a region. So if you make a mistake and click undo, what happens is the entire region is reverted to the previous version. When you click save on one item, the whole region moves forward one version. And that doesn't pose any practical problems until you want to do something like create a draft of an item and then create a draft of a second item and manage those independently. Because the whole region gets put into draft, you can't actually have different drafts at different levels, for example. That's one of the problems that collections tries to address, and it's particularly for larger amounts of content where this becomes more of an issue. The other thing that collections does is collections aren't tied to pages. So multiple item region exists on a page, and sometimes in bigger sites that means that you end up having a page that exists just to hold the multiple item region. It doesn't actually serve perhaps a useful purpose in the site. Otherwise, it might not be in the navigation anyway. You just end up with this page sat there to perform a content management task, which isn't ideal. So collections help you manage that better by not being tied to a page. So let's look at creating a collection. So under pages, we have this new submenu item that is collections. I can add a collection, and I'm going to call this one articles. And I hold a array of articles in it. You pick a template for it, just like you would for a region. I'm just going to use the example article template that we ship with. So that's my collection created, and I can start writing articles. Add a few in. Hello world, I'll set the date back a couple of days. This is my first article. Second, latest news. This is my second article. These are very exciting articles. I'm sure everybody will be coming to my website to read. So if I look at my my collection listing, you can see that I've got two articles in here. What we can, of course, do is go into the options, and we can customize the items that are in the listing. So I'm going to put in a heading, date, and perhaps just the author name, first and last name. Save that. Look back at the list of articles, and you can see now that I've got a more detailed listing. You can put things in here like images, and you get a thumbnail and that sort of stuff as well. The listings in collections are automatically paginated, unlike multiple item regions that assumes you've got a number that will, can be managed on one page. With a collection, that just automatically gets paginated. And of course, content can all be searched within the control panel in Perch Runway too. So that's our items added to collection. How do we output that collection onto a page? Let's go to our home page and add that there. So this is our home page, master page. Underneath this intro here, I'm going to output my collection articles. I've left that like that. It would output all of the articles, which is probably not what we want. So let's just output just the most recent article onto the home page. So we want to say sort by date. Sort order is sending. So that's newest, oldest, and the count 1 to the newest article off the top of the list. Save that and go to my home page. You can see the latest news. So that's just the most recent item out of the collection being output there at the top. So there are some other interesting features of collections. If I go back to my articles collection, one of the key things that we wanted to do was, in an instance like this, where we've got a body of articles and we're outputting them presumably in a sort of articles or a news section within the website, but also then there's the latest one is on the homepage. Thinking about how somebody who manages their site, an end client manages their site, they might look at their homepage of their site and think, oh, that news article is a bit out of date. I'll go and add a new news article. So they'd log in, they go to pages, they think, right, well, it's on the home page. They click to the home page. And of course, then that content isn't there because it's managed somewhere else. That's not very intuitive. It's not the end of the world. And I'm sure that person will find where that content actually lives. They'll perhaps remember some training they were given when they were first handed over the site. But it sort of creates a bump in the road that would be nice to eliminate. And collections really help in doing that. So here I am on the home page. If I go into page options, there's a collection section that says manage from this page, and I can just check the articles collection. So now the articles collection can be managed from this page. So if I submit that, so now when the end user goes to home page, there's their main heading, the introduction, and now the articles collection is listed there. And so they're going to find it when they want it. So if you click through to that, and that takes them through into that central location for editing this collection. There's another thing we can do though with the collection is if we go into its options, there's this new option for include in app menu. So if I check that and save, You'll see now that at the top in my apps menu, where I would have things like, well, categories, I might have, if I've had blog installed, gallery, members, those sorts of things, they'd appear in this apps menu. We also now have our articles collection appears there. So if I click that, it's now a sort of top level item as if it were an app, but it really is just a nice, easy to use collection. So that's sort of how collections really differ from multiple item regions and why they might be useful. Let's look at some of this URL routing that we were talking about and see how that might work and how we can avoid doing things like nasty htaccess rewrite rules in order to get nice clean URLs. On our homepage, we've got this news item listed out. Say we wanted to link that through to a detail page to show this news item. So the first thing we want to do is put a link perhaps on the heading. So I'll go into that article template and add a link around the heading. So go to article / and then we'll use ID for the moment. So type hidden, so I don't want to there's an edit field. So we just have /article/ in the ID of the article. So if I go back to my page and refresh it, you'll see I've then got the link where that's saying it's going to go to /article/2. I don't know if you can, if it might be a bit small, but you can see at the bottom /article/2. So obviously that page doesn't exist yet. So the next thing we want to do is create it. So I'm going to create a new master page that is for the article. So I'll go into templates pages, create a new page, call it article.php. I'll about. So let's get rid of this introduction. In its place, we are going to output an item. So we want Perch collection. Coming from is articles. And we want that ID from the URL and use that to filter. So we'll say filter ID is equal to, where we get an item from the URLs, Perch get, and say article ID. So we're going to display any articles that have the ID. Of course, IDs are unique, so it'll only display one. Any article that has the ID that's coming in from the URL. So create that page. So go into pages, add a page. And use the article master page. Now we don't want this article page to appear in the navigation because it's not something that a website user would navigate to directly. They're only going to follow an article link to get there. So we'll click hide from navigation. And the next thing we need to do is define a route with a pattern that matches /article/ and then an ID. So it's going to be article / and then we just need to put in a token that represents the ID and give it a name so that we can find it in the page. So we create tokens using square brackets. So that's just a number, just an integer. And the way we match an integer is just with I. Now we could just leave it like that. But what we want to do is we want to be able to deal with that ID in our page. So we have to give it a name, or it helps to give it a name so we can reference it with Perch get. So we put a colon and we call it article_ID as we were looking for on our page. So if I submit that, so now this page should respond on article/integer. So if I look at this page, and so here's our link that goes to /article/2. So hopefully if I click through this, we should then see the detail page showing us this latest news, which we do. And if I go to the URL and change it to /1, there's our first article. So that's just creating a simple page to match a pattern on the URL without having to write complex mod rewrite rules to be able to filter content and dynamically manage the page content from a nice clean URL. So that's something that collections and the URL routing enable us to do. One other key feature of larger sites tends to be the desire to focus more on performance. I think it tends to be more important when you have larger sites with potentially a lot more visitors. You want to make sure that your site performs really well under load. And a good way of doing that is by using a content delivery network. In order to deal with content delivery networks, they tend to work hand in hand with what we call cloud storage, which are remote storage services, things like Amazon S3, Rackspace Cloud Files, for example. So Perch Runway has built-in capability in it to be able to take particularly your assets, so your files and images, and move those up to cloud storage, so that they can either be served from a CDN or they can just be managed in somewhere it's a separate location from your web server. This is also really important when using dynamically provisioned hosting, so cloud hosting, that to deal with load, you might spin up some extra web servers, and those web servers will typically then reference a central database server, and they won't have any of your data on them. They need to reference a cloud storage location for the files. So this capability enables you to work in that sort of environment. The cloud storage is typically managed through the bucket list. You may be familiar with the bucket list from within Perch, which is a list of resource buckets. In Perch, we just it basically gives a web path and a file path, so they can be anywhere on your web server. In Perch Runway, they can actually be anywhere at all. They don't have to be on the web server. You can define buckets that are Amazon S3 buckets, that are Rackspace Cloud Files buckets, that are even Dropbox buckets, and you can just define where they're kept and how they behave, and Runway will just work with those as if they were local folders. So this enables us to use CDNs, and there's a couple of different types of CDN that are important to understand the difference. The first of those, the most simple type of CDN, is what we call a pull CDN. Now, instead of you putting your uploading your images onto the CDN, these actually work by you prefixing your image paths on your site with a CDN URL, and what that does is then points the request for the image or the CSS file or what have you over to the CDN. If they haven't got that file already, they then come back to your web server and get it, cache it, and then deliver it for all subsequent requests. So it actually requires very minimal configuration. You can do it just within your bucket file. A good example of a CDN that works this way is CDNify. They are really, really simple to set up with Perch. We've got a full guide on our site how to do that. If you just search on the documentation for CDNify, there's a full guide, but it really is only a few steps. You basically go to their site, you create a resource, and the resource is essentially your website. So here I'm creating mywebsite.com and giving it a name, and then what they do is they give you a URL. So here it's going to be like mysite.a.cdnify.io. So what I would do then is go to my bucket list, create a bucket. Here I'm calling it CDNify, and the web path then I set to just be the path to my resources folder, but I prefix it with that URL that CDNify gave me. So mysite.a.cdnify.io. So that means that instead of the user's browser just looking at /perch/resources for the image, it's actually going to go to CDNify's domain, look for the image there. Of course, then that's not just a dumb web server, that's an intelligent service which will look, see if it has the image. If it doesn't, it will then go to your web server and get it and deliver it to the user. So that's a really easy way of setting up a CDN. There's also things like Media Temple have their Pro CDN, which I think works in a similar way, that it just dynamically pulls the resources from your site. Once you get beyond the capabilities of something like that, you want something like Amazon S3 with their paired CloudFront CDN. So S3 is remote cloud storage, so it's basically just a big storage area that you can upload files to. CloudFront then is a CDN that draws files from that, from the S3 storage. So it's a really popular choice for bigger sites. It's reasonably priced as long as you're not moving huge amounts of data, and it's pretty robust. And I mean, services like Twitter, I believe, use S3 for all their avatars and things like that. It's pretty industrial strength. So the way you'd work with S3 and CloudFront and Runway is you create an Amazon Web Services account. As you can see, they have a few different services. The up in the top left is S3. So you'd go and you'd create a new, what they call a bucket, which is like a folder. You give it a name. And then you'd go into the CloudFront panel and you create what they call a distribution, so like a CDN distribution. You create as a web distribution. And then just like CDNify do, they give you a URL, which is where your files will be via their CDN. As you can see from this page, you can configure all sorts of caching options and things. It's a lot more advanced rather than just giving you, well, they do give you sensible defaults, but things like CDNify will give you just a good set of defaults that you don't necessarily need to do anything with. But then once you're into something like CloudFront, you can really start tweaking the details of it. So how would you then configure that once you've got up your S3 bucket ready for your files to go into? You've got your CloudFront CDN set up serving files from that bucket. What you do is you add the settings to your config/runway.php file for S3. So that looks like this. Inside the runway.php file, you've got a section that's Amazon S3, and you put in your access key and your secret, which is like your username and password for Runway to be able to put files into your S3 account. And then you define a bucket in your bucket list. And so this is an Amazon S3 bucket I've defined. You then give it the CloudFront URL as the path where to find the files. And then the file path here is just the name of the bucket it's looking for within the S3 account. If you're using something like Rackspace Cloud Files, that works in pretty much a similar way. You create an account and they give you access details just as that goes into your runway.php file just as with S3, and they can distribute things via CDN just in the same way. Rackspace Cloud Files is a more enterprisey type system, but it's based on an open source project called OpenStack, and you'll find that lots of different services will implement that. So we use a hosting company called Memset here in the UK, and they have a service called Memstore, which is based on exactly the same OpenStack system. So you can use that with Runway too. Anything that supports OpenStack is implemented using OpenStack. Runway can work with. So I'll perhaps do a demo of the actual using of the CDN and S3 stuff at the end, but we'll just look at backup and restore. So then if anybody who needs to get back to work and doesn't want to see the demo can do that. So one of the great features in Runway is the integrated backup and restore. It becomes particularly critical with larger sites where there's perhaps content going in more frequently, that you need some way to make sure that's all backed up. And what you don't want to do is rely on somebody to log into the site and click a button and download a zip file and save that somewhere safe. You just sort of want it to happen, set it up, and then not worry about it. Know that your site is backed up. And that's what the integrated backup and restore does in Runway. A really nice feature of it is that it will back up to any of the cloud storage buckets that you've defined in your bucket list. So that can be Amazon S3, it can be Rackspace Cloud Files. Obviously, with both those, you'd be using non-CDN distributed folders for those to go into. You'd be using, private folders because you don't want to distribute your backups to everyone. But you can also back up to Dropbox, and I think that's my favorite option because once you've got, if you sort of back it up into a Dropbox account that's then synced with your own computer, you can see each day or however frequently it's running, you can see those files come in. You've got a copy of them then locally if you need them, and it's all safe and you can just see it happening. It's really straightforward. So the first thing you need to do if you're going to back up into Dropbox is a slightly convoluted process that I really wish Dropbox would make simpler. But you actually need to create a Dropbox API app via the Dropbox website. It actually sounds more complex than it is. It's probably 4 or 5 steps that we've detailed in the documentation. You just go through and then you do it once and then it's done. But there's a few steps to be aware of. What this does is it creates an app within the apps folder in your Dropbox. That means that Runway only has restricted access to that one folder, so it can't do anything like access anything else in your Dropbox. It can only access its own folder inside apps. This is be the same as if you were using like an app on your iPad or iPhone that had Dropbox integration. That would do the same thing for syncing files across devices or whatever. It would be putting its files into an apps folder, and Runway's working the same way. So you set up a Dropbox API app via their website, and that gives you an access token, which you put into your config file. It looks a bit like this. In fact, it looks exactly like this. You go to the app console, create a new Dropbox API app. You say you want to store files and data stores. It only needs access to the folder it creates, and you give it a name. And you click Create App, and then they'll give you an access token, which you then go into your config runway.php file, and you drop that access token in there. And then that's Runway configured to talk to your Dropbox account, but you also then need to set up a bucket that actually uses that ability to talk to Dropbox. So create a Dropbox bucket there, just call it Dropbox, and it's going to put the files into a folder called backup. So how does that work? Go into Runway. All the backup stuff is managed within settings. So you go settings, backup, and we've got no backup plans configured, so we'll add a plan. Daily, and the assets every 24 hours. That's fine. Why is it seeing my bucket? It's not seeing my bucket. Oh, I think I forgot to put in my default configuration after I set it up. So where we go, config, buckets. Very good. So where's that slide? So Dropbox, return array. Dropbox. And its type is, and it doesn't need a web path. It's not Nothing is accessible via the web. This file path, we're just calling backup. There's my Dropbox bucket. Save that. Now it's appearing in my bucket list here. So say daily base and assets every 24 hours into the Dropbox bucket, make it active, save. So I've now got a backup plan called daily. As I didn't set up scheduled tasks when I did the install, because it's just a dev environment, that won't run every 24 hours because there's nothing running tasks. But what I can do is just hit backup now, and that should then create a backup and put it into my Dropbox as it's done. So there's a backup of my database. I've got no assets in the site. It's a brand new site, which is why it just says database backed up. And I could click restore and that would put it back. The other thing I can do is go to the top level of backup and click on this restore option. It lists all the buckets I've got capable of, all the cloud storage buckets that are set up. I could say find backups. And then it just looks at those buckets and finds any of the buckets that any of the backups that exist in that bucket. You can see this one that I've just created here, 18th of November, and I could click restore. So this actually serves as a really useful way of, so you've got a site in production that your client's been editing for a few months. They want some new features, functionality, whatever added to the site. You can go onto the live site, perform a backup, then go onto your dev copy locally, and then restore your dev copy from that live backup. And that would get you then up and running with all the pages and the content, etc., that the client had been creating over those last few months. So you'd then be ready to work with it. So that's the backup and restore. It's really great because even if your client's not that interested in backups, you could set it up to backup to, for example, your own company Dropbox account, and then you're just, without having to think about it again, you're just automatically keeping backups for your client. And if there's a disaster with perhaps a physical hardware problem with the web server and the hosting company doesn't have good backups, or maybe somebody in the client's company does something stupid and manages to delete their homepage or something crazy like that, you've got a recent backup and you can get them back up and running, and they'll be really thankful for that, I'm sure. So I think that's really great functionality. Before we look at the Amazon stuff, Rachel, are there questions that we need to look at? So the question is it easy to create relationships between collections? So yes, you can use the data select field type to do that. And also we've got some I guess sort of slightly more advanced ways of doing that. So the data select works much like it does in Perch at the moment, and that works between collections. And we've got some slightly more advanced ways of doing that in the works that I think are going to, as the functionality matures, is going to really provide great ways to do that and make that a really powerful feature, I think. Is there any other questions? Okay, so what I'll do is to run a quick demo of the of putting files and stuff up onto a CDN. So I'm going to need my Amazon configuration, which I don't have here. Let me just grab that. Should I somehow manage to grabbing my details for Amazon S3. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go back to our article template, and we'll add an image into that. So this is our article template, and we'll enter here Perch content type equals image type equals image. Label, which we'll say is, oh, I don't know, image. Importantly, now I have to put the bucket as Amazon S3, which I think is what I call bucket, which is my S3 bucket with the S3 configuration in, so it knows where to put it, and is also then configured to serve stuff via CloudFront. In a width of 800, stop getting out of control. Oh, and output equals tag. Easy. Go back into Runway here and go to our articles. Look at our latest news. We should now have got the ability to upload an image. So if I click on that, add an asset, and pick something to add. So what this will do is now it uploads that to Amazon S3, which just takes a moment longer than working locally, especially as I'm streaming video out of the same Wi-Fi connection. So we say use that, save our changes. So that generates the image at the right size of that article. And again, we'll be putting it up onto S3. So it just takes a slight moment longer. So if we go back to our articles, go to the home page, here's the latest news. Oh, and there's our article. And if I inspect that, we can see, you may be able to see here that that actually has the cloudfront.net URL in front of it, because that's now living on CloudFront and Amazon S3 and not being served from my local copy. So if I was to delete my database, reinstall, I could then re-import from a backup, and that would still be there on the remote server, ready for me to use. So that's sort of how the CDN stuff works. Pretty much seamless to the user once it's configured. So I think we've got a couple of questions.
So I've got, what would be the difference between using collections and the blog app?
So question, what would be the difference between using collections and the blog app? Ideally, there shouldn't be too much difference between using collections and the blog app. The idea of the blog app is it's particularly suited to get you up and running with a blog very easily without you having to put the infrastructure in place yourself. The idea with collections is they're supposed to be very flexible and allow you to manage any content of that nature. So that would include a blog. It's just that the blog app has got things that make it easy. A good example of that is the date field is very key on a blog. On blog posts, it's sort of pre-wired so that if a post has a future date, it doesn't display that post, and only once you hit that date does the post start to display. Now you can do that with collections, no problem. You just add a filter on the date, but blog does that for you because it knows that's the sort of functionality you want from a blog. It has things like authors built in, because typically if you have a multiple person blog, you want to show who wrote the post, and so that's tied in rather than you having to use a separate collection of authors and relate that to the collection of posts. And you can wire it all together yourself, and the idea of collections is supposed to be nice and flexible and help you do that, and enable you to sort of build out any content management that you want. But the blog app is particularly suited to doing a blog because it's got all those things sort of hardwired into it already.
Also, can the routing be used to give a friendly URL as well as the ID?
So the question, can the routing be used to give a friendly URL as well as the ID? Yes, absolutely. The ID was just simply a quick demonstration because every item of content in Perch has an ID, so we didn't have to set up something particular. So let's do that. Let's say, let's create a slug. So ID equals slug. I can't type now. Equals slug. So we filled it for heading. Let's say editable, so we can see it on the page. If we go back into our news articles, if we go to this one, oh, I didn't put a label on it. Let's put a label on it. Label slug. And suppress equals true to actually want to help on the page. Here we've got slug. So when I edit the heading, it's for, it will automatically update that. So you can see that now it's got a nice slug that's the latest news. So if I save that, that's now got the slug of the latest news. What's the other one? Is hello world. Let's go and edit that. So if I edit this, it should. So now we've got a nice slug for each of our articles. What we should be able to do is go back to our article page, go into the page options, add another pattern, and we can say article slash, and then we want to look for a slug, and we'll call that article, right, article underscore slug. So that shouldn't have affected the page. If we click on the latest news, we still have our, let's close this inspector, we still have our article, article slash 2. But what we can now do is add the ability to filter by slug. So let's change the link on the heading. In fact, probably the easiest way is just to copy this. Just move the slug to be here. Get rid of that suppress attribute. Now we're saying slug. I save that. Refresh the page. And now the link is slash article slash the latest news. And the next thing we need to do is modify the page to actually respond to that. So if I go to the article at PHP, we were filtering on ID. We now want to filter on slug. And we want to get the value article slug. Save that. Now we have a nice URL. And the other one was what, hello world. So if I go hello slash world, URL. I hope that answers the question. Are there any other questions that are there?
Probably very common. How do you write a query to display collections that are joined using a data select?
The question is, how do I write a query to display collections that are joined with the data select? That's probably too complex to just demonstrate on the fly. Yeah. So was that it for questions? Okay. So that was kind of just a brief overview of Runway. Obviously, if you've got any more detailed questions like that one, you can either post them to the forum or email us, and we'll write up a solution for you. As I say, I think Runway offers a good solution for those bigger projects with slightly more complex requirements, or I think it's still useful wherever you would use Perch. If you've then got things like, I mean, say you've got a small site, but the content's changing really rapidly, and you want to make sure you've got good backups, or just the client has an internal procedure that says, oh, we really need, a daily backup to be done. Well, if somebody was having to log in and do that every day, that would be very time consuming and would cost a lot of money in that person's sort of time. So really, at that point, it's probably just worth paying the difference to a runway license and getting that automated backup, for example. Or if if the site's only small but it's going to get a lot of peaks in traffic, and you might want to have a CDN to help you balance the load in that, then again, that sort of functionality is there and is really useful for that. So whilst it's particularly suited to bigger projects, I don't think that rules it out for smaller projects. But it's another good sort of good viable option. So let us know if this has been useful to you. And as I say, if you've got any questions, either post to the forum, which you can find if you go to forum.grabberperch.com, or you can email us hello@grabberperch.com, and we'll be more than happy to help. So thanks for coming along, thanks for listening, and